In the mid-century, the world looked up, and for the first time, not just with the wonder, but also with the ambition. The Cold War was raging, and the two superpowers were locked in, the United States and the Soviet Union. They turned their rivalry skyward, and in their desperation for the global influence, the space became the playground of reach. So while their rockets thundered, much of the world watched from the sideline, but not India. India was a newly independent nation. It was still trying to find its footing. Yet it showed the world that you don't need to throw cash like the confetti to reach the final frontier. You need the will to make it happen. This is the story of how a nation entered a race it was never expected to run, and did not just punch above its weight but also rewrote the rules. It was 1962. India's space program was born. It was called the INCOPSAR, that short form of the Indian Space Research Incorporation, and the driving force behind it was this man, the Vikram Sarabhai. How was one of the country's greatest scientists, and he chose Trumba as a launchpad of India's space ambitions. This is a small village in Kerala near Thiruvananthapuram of the Arabian Sea. Here a local church was turned into a lab. The priest home acted as an office for the mission, and on November 21st, 1963, scientists carried rocket parts on a bicycle. They took the parts to launch site, and the evening a rocket soared from a Trumba launchpad, a 715 kg Nike Apache rocket. It was made in America and carried a French payload. It lifted off, rose to 208 km, released a cloud of vapor, and painted the sky orange. And with that, India's first rocket launch was a success. It was a rocket. It was a great start, but not enough for the India to take up more complex missions. For that, you needed more structure, more clarity, and more self-reliance. India needed an action plan to back its aspirations. So in 1969, on the anniversary of India's Independence Day, INCOPSAR evolved into the ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, and from then the ISRO began pushing the boundaries of the India space prowess. In 1975, ISRO launched its first satellite. It was called the Aryabhat. It was named after the famous Indian mathematician and the astronomer Aryabhat. This satellite was launched by the Soviet rocket, but it was designed and built by the ISRO, and this was a major milestone. Over the next decade, India took the one leap after another. It was a roller coaster of the success, failures, and the learnings. In 1984 came a monumental shift. An Indian went to space. The Indian cosmonaut Rakesh Sharma. He became the first Indian ever to go space. He was part of the joint mission between the ISRO and the Soviet space program. Sharma spent 7 days, 21 hours and 40 minutes in space, but this journey was years in the making. In 1981, India joined hands with the Soviet Union. They had a short list of about 50 pilots. Finally, Rakesh Sharma was picked for the mission, and it was no mean feat. Going to space has never been easy. Not today, certainly not back then. Being in space for even a few hours can be punishing. Rakesh Sharma underwent grueling test. He was tested for the claustrophobia, means he was locked in a room with artificial lights for 72 hours. He was put on a controlled diet. He was tested by the Olympic trainers for the strength, endurance, and for speed. Plus, he was given 3 months to learn Russian. Given that most of the training was in that language, he had to learn it. None of it was easy, but the Rakesh Sharma made it happen. India made it happen. On 3rd April 1984, a Soviet rocket blasted off. It was launched from a spaceport in the Soviet Republic of Kazakhstan. It had 2 Russian astronauts on board along with the Rakesh Sharma from India. When he was up there, he was asked how India looked from this space. His reply, meaning India is the best in the world, and this was not just a poetic answer or a romantic observation. This was a moment of the national pride. The words carried deep significance and the symbolism. They were borrowed from the legendary poem written during the British colonial rule, the rule that ravaged India. So, when an Indian in space echoed these words, he was sending a message to the world that India's setbacks were temporary and its rise inevitable. The next decade was marked by the intense research, new innovations, new rockets, including PSLV, Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle. And the PSLV is known as workhorse of ISRO. Its creation marked the beginning of the series of successful flights. Around this time, a major shift was also underway globally. It was the era of the dot-com boom, the internet taking the world by the storm. So, at the turn of the century, ISRO developed GSLV, the Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle, to cater growing communication needs. But these wins come after many hurdles. To build advanced rockets, India needed more efficient fuel, and there was only one answer: cryogenic engine. This uses liquid hydrogen and the liquid oxygen and as a fuel. So it is lighter, it gives more thrust. This is what India needed. But we did not have the technology to make it. So we thought of procuring the engines from the other countries. India first talked to Japan, nothing come of it. Then talked to the Europe, again no luck. Then India signed a deal with the Russia. New Delhi sent scientists to Moscow to work with the researchers, but the Russians were very secretive about the technology and the discussions were limited. Plus, the US did not like this one bit. It feared that India would use this tech to build the ballistic missiles. Indian scientists rejected this repeatedly. At Washington raised objections. It slapped sanctions on ISRO. It tried to cripple our space program, but India remained underrated. It set out to build its own cryogenic engine, and the early 2000s ISRO achieved this ambitious goal. India was far from done. Next, we set our eyes on the moon. Again, critics, mainly West, mocked India. They said we had too much property for such a rich dreams. Indian scientists gave them a fitting reply. In 2008, we launched Chandrayaan-1. This was India's first moon mission. It orbited the lunar surface at a height of 100 km. It mapped the moon and did valuable research. Chandrayaan-1 was the first to confirm the presence of water in the lunar soil. This excited scientists everywhere, but the critics remained blinded by their prejudice. They refused to believe India's strength in space. Irrespective, India kept raising the bar. The next target was Mars, and this was going to be tough, but this too was achieved. In 2013, India launched the Mars orbiter mission, Mongolian. This was India's first interplanetary mission. It successfully inserted itself into the Martian orbit. It's a very fast attempt, and this made India the first country in the Asia and the fourth in the world to achieve this feat. Only US, Russia, and Europe had the previously sent mission to Mars, but the India succeeded in its first attempt, and in this respect, it outperformed everyone else. And the best part, India did it all on the economy ticket at a nominal cost of $74 million, and this was the cheapest anywhere in the world, and it came as a major reality check to the world. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi rightly said, India's real-life martial adventure cost less than the Hollywood space movies. This should have inspired the West, but old habits die hard. They choose ridicule over the recognition. You may remember this cartoon. The New York Times published it. It shows the farmer with a cow knocking on a door of room which marked a Allied Space Club. Inside, two men in the Western attire sit reading a newspaper detailing the India's feat. This was the journey dressed up as a mockery, and it spreaded global outrage. The New York Times had to apologize for it. As for India, instead of being discouraged, it was even more determined to prove its mettle. In 2019, came a Chandrayaan 2 where ISRO attempted soft landing on the moon. It was a partial success. 4 years later, the Chandrayaan 3 returned with a bang, another attempt of soft landing on the moon. This time it was a success. India had get chased into the Elite Club. Elite Club. It became the first country in the world to land on Moon's south pole, and again it was a budget space flight. India spent $75 million on this historic project. For perspective, the Hollywood space thriller The Gravity had a budget of $100 million. India landed on the moon for the far less, and each win fueled the fire to aim higher. Subhanshu Shukla became the first Indian astronaut to blast off to the International Space Station, Axiom Space. He was aboard the private Axiom space mission 4. It lifted off from the NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Shukla carried the aspirations of 1.4 billion Indians to the space. People were glued to their TV screens as they took off. They prayed, they cheered, and they celebrated. It took more than 26 hours to get there. Shukla became the second Indian to travel to space 41 years after Rakesh Sharma achieved the feat. In her return to the orbit and when up there, Shukla said,
कि आज का भारत अभी भी सारे जहां से अच्छा दिखता है.
Goosebumps aside, he was a point India's space industry is becoming. It was valued at $8.4 billion. That's about 2% of the global space market. By 2033, India wants to capture 8% of the global space market. It wants to grow the space economy to the $44 billion. It's an ambitious plan, but not an impossible one. Over past few years, India's space economy has seen groundbreaking advantages. The government is pushing for it with the reforms and the inclusion of the private players. The 5 years there was less than 50 space startups in the country. Today there are more than 2,000 startups. India is on the path of becoming the space superpower, and it is being driven by the 4 factors: strong government support, rapid tech innovation, ISRO's research-focused approach, and the involvement of the private companies. The future of India's space looks exciting. We have the Gaganyaan coming off, our human space flight mission scheduled for 2027. For the plan is to launch 3 crew members to the orbit by 2035. India wants to set off its own space station called the Bharatiya Antariksh Station, and by 2040 there are plans to send an Indian to the moon. So from the Aryabhat to the lunar landings, the Mars missions, and now Gaganyaan, India's space program has not just come a long way, it was redefined what is possible. It has shown the world that space exploration does not need the bottomless budget, it needs boundless ambitions.